Dr. Elena Vasquez never expected that fixing a child's broken toy would lead to an entire alien fleet treating her like a miracle worker. But that's exactly what happened when the young Karanathi cubs, fierce predator children of the warrior species everyone feared, began telling their parents that the human fixes broken things. Not just objects, but the things inside that hurt. And now Elena stood in the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel, facing two towering Karanathi sisters. Commander Zaira and her sibling Talkara, both easily 8 feet tall with obsidian exoskeletons and luminous violet eyes, and Zaira had just issued an ultimatum that made Elena's head spin. Choose one of us to bond with. Dr. Vasquez, choose to stay with my diplomatic mission and help us rebuild connections we've lost. Or choose my sister's military command and help us heal warriors broken by endless war. Choose one, or I'll choose for you by having you reassigned to Earth within the hour. Because this fleet cannot survive the chaos of everyone wanting your attention, your gift, your ability to mend what we thought was permanently shattered. Elena's mind raced back to 3 weeks ago, when she'd arrived on the Karnathi flagship as part of Earth's cultural exchange program. A linguist and anthropologist tasked with studying this intimidating species that had dominated the sector for centuries. And she'd been terrified initially because the Karnathi looked like nightmares. Massive insectoid warriors with razor-sharp mandibles and armored carapaces that could deflect plasma fire. A species bred for conquest that had only recently agreed to peace talks with the Human Alliance. And Elena had expected cold military efficiency, had prepared herself for clinical observation and formal exchanges, but instead she'd encountered something completely unexpected in the ship's communal area where off-duty Karnathi gathered. 3 small cubs, barely 3 feet tall with soft, incomplete exoskeletons and oversized, curious eyes, had been huddled in a corner crying because one of them had broken her cherished toy, a crystalline sculpture that her deceased father had made before dying in battle, and the adult Karnathi were standing around looking helpless because their culture had no concept of repair, only replacement. The warrior philosophy being that broken things stayed broken, that loss was permanent, that you honored what was destroyed by accepting its destruction rather than trying to reclaim it. Elena had watched this scene unfold, had seen the little cub named Shira clutching the pieces of her father's sculpture and wailing with a grief that transcended species. And something in Elena's heart, something shaped by growing up poor in Mexico City where nothing was ever thrown away, where her grandmother had taught her that everything could be fixed with patience and love, where broken meant opportunity to make something stronger rather than reason to give up, had compelled her to kneel beside the cubs and say in halting Karnathi, "May I try to help?" The adult warriors had looked skeptical. Some had even made warning clicks suggesting this was inappropriate human interference. But Shira had looked up at Elena with those enormous violet eyes full of desperate hope and had handed over the shattered pieces. And Elena had spent the next 4 hours in her quarters carefully gluing and reconstructing the crystal sculpture, using human adhesives and techniques the Karnathi had never seen. And when she'd returned it to Shira, not perfect, with visible seams and small pieces still missing, but recognizably the beautiful bird-like creature her father had intended, the cub had made a sound Elena had never heard before, a thrumming purr of pure joy, and had thrown her small arms around Elena's waist and said, "You fixed it, you fixed what was broken. You brought my father's love back to me." The other cubs, Kelvon and little Tess, had crowded around demanding to see, touching the repaired sculpture with reverent wonder. And they'd started asking Elena questions. Could she fix other broken things? Could she fix the crack in Kelvan's sleeping pod? Could she fix the torn wing of Tess's stuffed creature? Could she fix the broken things inside people too? The hurts that didn't show but felt worse than any physical wound. Elena had laughed and said she'd try, not understanding the significance of what she was agreeing to, not realizing that in Karnathi culture, cubs were considered prophetically intuitive, that their observations carried spiritual weight, that when they identified someone as having a special gift, the entire community listened. Within days, word had spread through the fleet that the human could fix broken things, and Karnathi started approaching Elena tentatively at first, then in increasing numbers, bringing her damaged equipment and torn clothing and shattered heirlooms. And Elena had fixed what she could using human ingenuity and the radical concept that broken didn't mean worthless. That repair was possible, that with patience and care and the right approach, even shattered things could be made whole again. But then the requests had changed, had become more personal and infinitely more complex. When warriors started coming to her not with broken objects, but with broken hearts, with psychological wounds from decades of war, with grief they'd been taught to suppress, with traumas they'd been told to ignore, and they'd sit in her quarters and tell her things they'd never told anyone. And Elena would listen and offer what comfort she could, would apply the same philosophy to emotional wounds that she applied to physical repairs, that healing was possible, that broken didn't mean finished, that with time and care and the willingness to sit with pain rather than running from it, people could be mended too. The transformation in the fleet had been remarkable and destabilizing in equal measure. Karnathi, who'd been cold and efficient, started showing emotions, started talking about their losses instead of burying them, started questioning the warrior culture that demanded they treat themselves as replaceable rather than repairable. And this shift had created tension between the two factions led by the commander sisters. Zaira, who led the diplomatic mission, saw Elena's influence as exactly what the Karnathi needed to evolve beyond their warrior past, to build a culture that valued healing and connection, to develop the emotional sophistication necessary for genuine peace with other species. And she'd started spending time with Elena, asking questions about human culture and psychology, sharing stories about her own struggles with command and the loneliness of leadership. And Elena had felt a connection forming, something deeper than professional interest. Something that made her aware of Zaira not just as an intimidating alien commander, but as a person carrying enormous burdens with grace and hidden vulnerability. But Talkara, who commanded the military wing, saw Elena's influence as dangerous, as weakening warrior discipline, as making her soldiers too emotional and therefore less effective in combat, and she'd confronted Elena multiple times, had argued that broken warriors should be retired, not repaired, that teaching Karnathi to dwell on pain rather than transcend it was cruelty, not kindness, and yet Talkara kept coming back, kept engaging in heated debates that gradually revealed her own wounds, the soldiers she'd lost, the orders she regretted, the weight of sending people to die and having to act like their deaths meant nothing. And Elena had realized that Talkara's opposition wasn't really about military effectiveness. It was about self-protection, about a warrior who'd built walls around her heart so high that Elena's message of healing and repair threatened to bring them crashing down. The situation had reached a crisis point when a decorated war hero named Kethran had come to Elena in crisis, had admitted he was contemplating ending his life because he couldn't reconcile the soldier he'd been with the person he wanted to become in peacetime, couldn't live with the memories of what he'd done, couldn't see a path forward that didn't involve either numbing himself into nothing or escaping into death. And Elena had spent 6 hours talking him through the immediate crisis and then had worked with him over weeks to process his trauma, to understand that acknowledging guilt and grief didn't make him weak but made him whole, that he could honor those he'd killed by becoming someone who protected life rather than someone who pretended. The killing had never hurt him. Catherine's transformation from suicidal to healing had inspired dozens of other warriors to seek Elena's help, and the flood of damaged souls seeking repair had become unmanageable, had started affecting fleet operations as warriors spent off-duty hours in line outside Elena's quarters. And that's when Zaira and Talkara had called her to the observation deck and issued their ultimatum. "You cannot serve everyone," Zaira explained, her melodic voice gentle but firm. "The fleet is dividing between those who embrace your philosophy and those who resist it, between those who want to heal and those who believe healing is weakness. And Dr. Vasquez, you must choose which path the Karnathi will take. Will you join my diplomatic mission and help us build a culture of emotional honesty and repair? Or will you join Talkara's command and help our warriors process trauma so they can return to duty stronger? You cannot do both. The philosophical divide is too great. So choose." Elena looked between the two sisters, saw Zahra's hopeful expression and Talcara's defensive posture, and she realized this choice wasn't really about her at all. It was about the Karnathi's future, about whether they would evolve into a culture that valued healing or remain a culture that valued strength. And neither option felt complete. Both felt like choosing one truth and rejecting another equally valid truth. And Elena's grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Mija, when someone gives you two bad choices, make a third one. Don't let others define your options. Elena took a deep breath and said, With respect, commanders, I reject your premise. I refuse to choose one of you over the other. Not because I can't decide, but because the choice itself is false. You're asking me to pick between healing for peace and healing for war, between emotional growth and military effectiveness, between helping Karnathi become diplomats or helping them become better warriors. But those aren't opposites, those are complementary. Warriors who process their trauma are more effective, not less effective. Cultures that embrace emotional honesty are stronger in both peace and war. You don't need to choose between your sister's vision and yours, Talcara. You need to integrate them. You need to build a Karnathi culture that values both strength and vulnerability, both honor and healing, both warrior discipline and emotional authenticity. The two sisters stared at Elena with expressions she couldn't read, their mandibles clicking in patterns that might have been surprise or anger or something else entirely. And Talcara said, her voice sharp, You presume to tell us how to rebuild our entire culture? You've been here 3 weeks and you think you understand the Karnathi better than we do. This is exactly why I opposed your influence. You change too much too quickly without understanding what you're destroying. But Zahra was making a sound Elena had learned was laughter, a rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the deck, and she said, Sister, she just did exactly what the Cubs said she does. She took something we presented as broken, our choice between two incompatible paths, and she fixed it by showing us it wasn't actually broken, just poorly understood. And Talcara, can you honestly tell me that helping our warriors process trauma makes them weaker? You've seen Kethron. You've seen how he went from suicidal to becoming the most effective trainer in your division. You've seen how the warriors who talked to Dr. Vasquez returned to duty with renewed purpose rather than just numbness. What if she's right? What if we've been thinking about strength and healing as opposites when they're actually the same thing? Talcara's exoskeleton seemed to darken with emotion, and she turned away from both of them to look out at the stars. And when she spoke, her voice was rough with suppressed feeling. I lost my bonded partner in the war. Zahra knows, but no one else does. I watched Keshatar die and I couldn't save him, and I told myself it didn't matter because Karnathi don't dwell on loss. We honor the fallen by continuing to fight, and I've carried that wound for 7 years pretending it doesn't exist, pretending I'm whole when I'm shattered. And Dr. Vasquez, when you talk about fixing broken things, when those Cubs tell everyone you can mend broken hearts, I want to believe it's true, but I'm terrified because if I let myself feel Keshatar's loss after 7 years of denial, I don't know if I'll survive the grief. I don't know if I'll be able to put myself back together. Elena felt tears prick her eyes at this admission, at the vulnerability in this warrior who'd seemed impenetrable, and she crossed the space between them and gently touched Talcara's armored arm and said, Grief doesn't kill us, Talcara. It's the suppression of grief that kills us slowly from the inside. And yes, if you let yourself feel what you've been avoiding for 7 years, it will hurt terribly. It will feel like dying. But on the other side of that pain is the possibility of actually living again instead of just surviving, of honoring Keshatar not by pretending his death didn't wound you, but by allowing yourself to be wounded and choosing to heal anyway. And I can't fix you. No one can fix another person. But I can sit with you while you do the hard work of fixing yourself. I can hold space for your grief without trying to rush you through it or make it comfortable. I can remind you that broken doesn't mean finished. It just means you're in the middle of your story instead of at the end. Talcara turned to look at Elena, and her luminous violet eyes were wet with tears that the Karnathi apparently could cry despite their insectoid appearance. And she said, The Cubs were right about you. You do fix broken things, not by using glue or tools, but by making us believe repair is possible, by giving us permission to be broken without shame, by showing us that healing is strength, not weakness. And Dr. Vasquez, I apologize for trying to force you to choose. You were correct that the choice was false. I was trying to avoid transformation by making you pick a side, but you refused to play that game. You offered integration instead of division, and that's what the Karnathi need, what I need. Zaira joined them at the observation window, and Elena noticed for the first time how similar the sisters looked despite their different roles, both carrying burdens, both afraid in different ways, both needing healing they'd been taught was impossible. So what do we do now? Zaira asked. How do we integrate healing into both military and diplomatic operations? How do we train our people to process trauma and grief without losing the strength that's kept us alive? How do we transform our culture? Elena smiled and said, We start small. We start with what I did with Shira's sculpture. We take one broken thing and we fix it together, and then we take another and another, and we build capacity for repair one person at a time. And yes, it will take years or decades or generations, but transformation always does. You don't heal centuries of warrior culture overnight. You heal it one heart at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment of vulnerability at a time. And the beautiful thing about healing is that it spreads. People who've been fixed start helping others fix themselves. Wounds that are tended become wisdom that can guide others. And eventually you build a culture where brokenness isn't shameful, but is just part of the journey. Where asking for help is strength, where repair is valued as much as initial creation. The three of them stood together looking at the stars, and Elena felt a shift in the energy, felt possibility opening where before there had only been rigid options, and she thought about the cubs who'd started all this, who'd seen something in her that she barely saw in herself, who'd told everyone that humans fix broken things and had been proven prophetically right. Over the following months, Elena worked with both sisters to develop what they called the Healing Integration Program. Combining Talcara's military discipline with Zaira's diplomatic empathy, creating spaces where warriors could process trauma without losing their effectiveness, where strength and vulnerability could coexist, where repair was understood as an ongoing practice rather than a one-time fix. The cubs, Shira and Kelvan and Tess, became ambassadors of the new approach, teaching other young Karnathi that broken things could be mended, that asking for help was brave, that emotions weren't weaknesses but were guidance systems that helped you navigate life. Elena found herself developing deep connections with both sisters. Zaira, who approached healing with intellectual curiosity and emotional openness, who shared her fears about leadership and her hopes for Karnathi evolution, who made Elena laugh with her observations about human peculiarities and who listened with genuine interest to Elena's stories about Earth, and Talcara, who approached healing with warrior discipline and hard-won vulnerability, who worked through her grief over Keshatar with determination and tears, who taught Elena about Karnathi combat philosophy and honor codes, who protected Elena fiercely when conservative factions tried to oppose the changes she represented. Elena realized she was developing feelings for both sisters, different but equally strong feelings, and she worried about this complication until Zaira explained that Karnathi bonding worked differently than human romance, that they formed clan bonds rather than pair bonds, that it was perfectly natural to love multiple people in different ways and build family through choice rather than exclusivity. And would Elena consider staying permanently, becoming part of their emerging clan, helping guide the Karnathi transformation not as an outsider but as family? The question took Elena's breath away, made her think about everything she'd left on Earth and everything she'd found among the Karnathi, made her confront her own broken places, the loneliness she'd carried, the feeling of never quite belonging, the sense that her skills and perspective were valued in theory but not in practice by human institutions that preferred credentials over wisdom, prestige over genuine help. I need to understand something, Elena said to both sisters during a quiet evening in Zaira's quarters. When you gave me that ultimatum, when you said choose one of us, what were you actually asking? Was it really about choosing between diplomatic or military assignment? Or were you asking something more personal? Zaira and Talcara exchanged glances, and Talcara said with unusual gentleness, We were asking if you could love us, Dr. Vasquez. If you could see beyond our frightening exteriors and our complicated dynamics and our broken culture to the people underneath, We were asking if you would choose to stay and be part of our lives, and we framed it as a forced choice because we were afraid. Afraid you'd reject us both. Afraid we weren't worthy of the care you give so freely to everyone else. Afraid that you fix broken Karnathi but would never let broken Karnathi close enough to fix you in return. Elena felt emotions welling up, felt her own walls cracking, and she said, "You think I'm the one doing all the fixing. But you've both fixed things in me I didn't know were broken, Zara. You've shown me that intellectual curiosity and emotional depth aren't contradictory, that I can be both the anthropologist and the healer, the observer and the participant, and Talkara. You've shown me that strength doesn't mean never being vulnerable, that sometimes the bravest thing is admitting you're wounded and asking for help. And both of you have made me feel seen and valued in ways I never felt on Earth. Where my approach was always too emotional for academia and too intellectual for therapy, too unconventional for institutions that wanted me to fit into neat categories." She paused, gathering courage, and said, "So yes, I choose both of you. I choose this emerging clan. I choose to stay and help build something new. Not because I think I'm essential or because I have some magical fixing power, but because I've finally found a place where being broken and healing, being strong and vulnerable, being individual and connected aren't contradictions, but are just different facets of being whole." Zaira made that thrumming laugh sound, and Talkara's exoskeleton brightened with colors Elena had learned indicated joy, and both sisters moved to embrace Elena carefully, aware of their size and strength. Gentle despite their warrior nature, and Elena felt something settle in her chest, some piece clicking into place. Some broken thing she'd carried for years finally mending. The news spread through the fleet that Dr. Vasquez had chosen to stay, had joined the commander's emerging clan, and the response was overwhelmingly positive from those who'd been transformed by her presence and skeptical from those who still clung to old warrior ways. But even the skeptics couldn't deny the results. Warriors were more effective after processing trauma. Diplomatic relations improved when Karnathi could express and manage emotions. Cubs raised with the understanding that brokenness was temporary were developing into more resilient adults, and the human alliance saw the Karnathi becoming genuine partners rather than barely restrained aggressors. Elena established training programs teaching Karnathi the art of repair. Not just psychological repair, but literal fixing of broken objects. Teaching them that patience and care could restore what seemed lost, that visible seams in repaired items told stories of survival and resilience rather than stories of permanent damage, that the Japanese concept of kintsugi, where broken pottery was repaired with gold, was a philosophy the Karnathi desperately needed, the understanding that broken things mended with care became more beautiful and valuable than things that had never been damaged. The cubs, now slightly older and even more confident, started teaching their peers, started creating a generation of Karnathi who would grow up understanding that healing was strength, that asking for help was wisdom, that the humans who'd seemed so weak and soft actually had something profound to teach about resilience and repair. Shiera, the first cub Elena had helped, became especially close to her, would often sit in Elena's quarters asking questions about Earth and humans and why Elena had chosen to help when she didn't have to. And Elena would tell her about her grandmother, about growing up poor, about learning that the most valuable things were often broken, things lovingly mended, about understanding that people, like objects, could be repaired if someone cared enough to try. One evening, Shira asked, "Dr. Vasquez, when you first fixed my father's sculpture, when you spent all those hours on something that didn't benefit you, why did you do it? What did you hope to gain?" Elena smiled and said, "I didn't hope to gain anything, little one. I just couldn't bear to watch you hurt when I had the ability to help. And that's not uniquely human or uniquely Karnathi. That's just what we do when we're living from our best selves. We see suffering and we respond. We see brokenness and we offer repair. Not because we expect reward, but because mending the world one small piece at a time is how we make meaning, is how we transform pain into purpose, is how we become who we're meant to be." Years later, when human anthropologists studied the Karnathi transformation and tried to identify the pivotal moment, they would point to policy changes or diplomatic initiatives, but those who'd lived through it knew the truth. The transformation began when 3 cubs told everyone that humans fix broken things. When a fleet of warriors started bringing their broken hearts to a human woman who offered not solutions but presence. Not fixes, but faithful witnessing of pain. Not rescue, but partnership in the hard work of healing. And when that woman chose integration over division, chose both sisters over forced choice, chose to stay and build family with aliens who seemed like monsters, but who were really just people carrying wounds they'd been taught to hide. People desperate for permission to be broken and for hope that repair was possible. Elena sometimes thought about the choice Zara had demanded. Choose one sister or I'll choose for you. And she smiled at how she'd rejected that entire framework. How she'd refused to let fear and scarcity dictate her options. How she'd insisted on abundance and integration, and the radical idea that love wasn't a limited resource requiring painful choices, but was an expanding force that grew when shared. And that lesson, that insistence on third options when presented with 2 bad choices, became central to the new Karnathi culture that emerged, a culture that refused either-or thinking in favor of both and wisdom, that rejected the warrior philosophy of hard choices and acceptable losses in favor of creative solutions that honored all life, that transformed from a species everyone feared into a species everyone respected for their commitment to growth and healing and the brave work of becoming more than their history suggested was possible. The cubs grew into adults who taught their own children about the human who'd shown them that broken things could be mended, who'd given them permission to hurt and hope for healing, who'd loved their mothers and their culture enough to stay when she could have left, to challenge when she could have accepted, to offer integration when everyone else was offering division, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, who'd arrived as a linguist studying aliens and who stayed as family-loving people, never regretted choosing both sisters, choosing the third option, choosing to believe that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't strength or intelligence or technology, but was the simple, stubborn insistence that broken things deserve repair, that wounded people deserve healing, that the phrase, "that's just how it is," should always be met with, "But what if it could be different?" And that sometimes the most revolutionary act is refusing impossible choices and creating better options, refusing to accept that anyone or anything is beyond repair, refusing to let fear or tradition or cultural momentum prevent transformation, and instead offering presence and patience and the radical love that says, "You're broken and that's okay. I'm broken too. We're all broken in different ways." But broken doesn't mean finished. It just means we're in the middle of our story. And with care and time and the willingness to sit with pain rather than running from it, we can mend ourselves and each other and build something more beautiful than what existed before the breaking. Because repair tells a story that perfection never can. The story of survival and resilience and love strong enough to piece together shattered things and call them whole.